Welcome to the Litigation Psychology Podcast, brought to you by Courtroom Sciences. Dr. Steve Wood. Joining me today is a new guest, one of our newer consultants to Courtroom Sciences, Linda Khzam. Linda, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm good. This should be an interesting conversation. You and I talk consistently and talk a lot of these topics we're going to talk about today, so it should be good. And this is one of the first times you'll be on the podcast, but I have a feeling it won't be the last. I know we have some other podcasts coming up that we are going to talk about. So good to have you on, at least now, to get you introduced to the listeners and the viewers.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, really excited. And like you said, we spend tons of time talking about this stuff on the daily. So figured it's nice to get some of this stuff out and um, see how this can help other people as
Yeah,
they're navigating some of this stuff.
and I want to start initially too, really, because like I said, this is the first time, and then I want to get a chance for everyone to kind of understand and know you a little bit. So let's just start from the beginning as far as kind of what's your background from where you started, and then kind of the pathway that led you to courtroom sciences.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will start by saying I'm a Los Angeles native. I love it here, been here my whole life. And went to undergrad here from the San Fernando Valley, if anyone is familiar, but that area. But I went to undergrad there, and my big plans in undergrad, I was actually pre-med there, and in my million and a half classes that you need to take, I was in a physiology class and really took a liking to that. And it was like a cognitive physiology. And the teacher, the professor, and I really, it really, we kind of connected, and he kind of mentored me through this, and I really took a liking to that. So after undergrad, I kind of went down to through the cognitive neuroscience path. I ended up going to grad school for clinical psychology, but all of it was really cognitive neuroscience based. And then after grad school, I ended up working with our city attorney's office, working with crime victims. So essentially doing kind of this stuff for helping crime victims navigate the criminal justice system and prepping them for trials. So all that on the criminal side. And then after that, I ended up switching over to the civil side, actually doing all plaintiff stuff. But I essentially then started doing case evaluations for TBI cases and on the civil side of it, and then ended up doing paralegal work essentially again. And after that, I really just felt like there's got to be a marriage. Everything thus far had been some sort of cognitive neuroscience based, whether it was the TBI stuff or working with crime victims. There was some psychology and some science through and law throughout all of it. And I said, there's got to be some happy medium. If law and psychology, got married and had a baby, there's got to be somewhere that exists. And that's how I got to courtroom sciences.
And it's funny that you say that because that's where kind of my backstory back to 2003, where I was doing the same thing. Wanted to be an attorney when I was growing up, and then fell into psychology, really liked it, and then had a professor say, "Hey, I know you like this law stuff. I know you like the psychology stuff. Did you know that there's actually a field that exists?" So it's funny how everybody's path ends up finding like you have these interests that are similar, and then you realize that this is kind of a marriage of both of them.
Yeah. Sometimes the path is a little zigzaggy, but we get there, right?
Yeah. And I guess, how have you noticed as far as at least kind of with your work of what you're doing now, prepping witnesses, training witnesses, how do you see kind of a similarity between when you were getting those crime victims ready to testify at trial? I'm sure there were some similarities, a little bit of difference, but I'm sure some similarities.
Yeah, the first thing right off the bat that I'll tell you is on either side of them, no one knows what's going on. They don't know how to navigate the criminal justice system. They don't know what the words mean. They're meeting with these attorneys. They don't know what's going to happen next. They don't know what the outcomes are going to be, how to navigate all of that. And it's the same thing on the civil side. We do this day in, day out. And so these words that we think are totally normal or, oh, it should be really obvious that this is what the process is, it's not obvious. And so I think that is probably the biggest hurdle for lots of people to overcome is that they don't know what's going on. And like I tell witnesses I work with now, coming into whether you're coming into for deposition or for trial prep or just being exposed to this litigation process, it's almost like going to a new country. They talk different, the rules are different, the roads are different. And it's like, okay, here, go ahead and find your way around. So really, I think one of the most helpful things that we can give the people that we work with is a roadmap, a dictionary. This is what these things mean, so that they're at least coming in on some solid footing. I think that's the same on both sides.
Yeah, and it kind of leads into the topic of what we're going to talk about today is you and I actually wrote a paper in Law 360, and it was you did a lot of the heavy lifting. I'll give you credit for that because it was kind of your idea to talk about because I think it grew out of some of your experiences on both sides, both in the criminal and the civil side. But I think when we work with witnesses, you have various types, right? The angry, the defensive, the argumentative, but then you have kind of the anxious witness. And I don't know what your thoughts are as far as how you'd rank where the anxious witness kind of is as it relates to these other ones. I mean, each one has its own kind of special challenges, but where do you kind of feel of when you get a call from an attorney where they say, I have an anxious witness?
I'll schedule more time right off the bat, block off the calendar. No, but certainly, and like you said, everyone's coming in with their own challenges. The people that are just inherently anxious, yeah, we've got lots more work to do. A lot of it is probably going to be around exposing them to what this is, exposing them to what this feels like, have them go through some questioning and get that sense. And as those feelings are coming up, okay, let's kind of unpack that, what's happening right now. And a lot of that I think is so helpful even for attorneys to notice that as we're going through, for if we are going working with a anxious witness and we're putting them through this so that they can we can see what comes up for them and we can navigate that. For the attorneys, it's also helpful because that kind of clues them as to, like, well, if I'm seeing this in the deposition, this is maybe where I need to pump the brakes and ask and take a break. So it helps expose what that anxiety looks like so that the attorneys can also identify that, and treat accordingly. If you're mid deposition, I use a tea kettle analogy, which is essentially, Bill calls it like a amygdala hijack. But what we don't want to have happen is essentially, if you've got pot of water, a kettle of water, and it's take some heat. Eventually, everyone kind of has a boiling point. If you don't stop and catch it before the kettle flips its lid, now you're making a mess, right? You're saying things you don't want to say. And really, if we can identify when the lid is going to flip and cool it off before that, I think we eliminate a lot of problems.
And I think you bring up an important point too, is the idea of, not waiting till the lid flips. Because I think, I mean, what has been your experience where a witness is going to be anxious, you work with them, and then they go to the deposition, and then you hear later that the witness got anxious. We kind of knew that was going to come, but I think a lot of times it circles back to the idea of the witness got too far down the path rather than stopping it before it started, right? I mean, what are your thoughts as far as do you let it get to the point where you see the witness is spiraling out of control, or do you sense the witness is spiraling out of control because you know it is, and then you stop it before?
Yeah, you got to stop it before. Once you've flipped your lid, once the amygdala is taken over, your logical thinking is gone out the window. So at that point, it's too late. And then you're like, hey, do you need a break? And the witness is like, no, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. And it's like, oh, but you're not fine, right? And I'm like, anyone that's been in any sort of argument kind of can attest to this, where they're like, I'm like this. I'm like, no, I'm totally calm. I don't flip my lid, but at some point I will, and I'm not going to maybe say things that are, I don't shout or I don't do anything like that, but I will flip my lid, and I will. My defense mechanism is to be super super argumentative, and I will debate you to the death. And even
I can
me in
attest to
my
that. You and I have had
yes,
many,
yeah,
many friendly debates on things.
I will debate to the death. And that is me flipping my lid. But when I'm in that, it doesn't seem like I flip my lid, but I have, because logically I should be able to know that I've actually gone too far with my argument. I've gone too far. The person's not listening. But because I've flipped my lid, I'm off to the races. And so even if it's more covert like that, and it's not arguing or shouting, once that happens, your logical thinking is out the window.
Yeah, and I guess how much of it becomes getting the witness to understand kind of like a lot of them know that they're anxious, but they probably don't know how anxious they look or how anxious like they know they're going to be nervous. They just don't realize how nervous they're really going to be. But I guess what is your thoughts about kind of getting the witness to understand what it is to be anxious, how it feels, so that they can actually kind of check their own temperature too, because sometimes the attorneys may not notice it. Sometimes, to your point where you said you may not flip your lid, but you're going to debate. And in your own mind, you realize, uh-oh, I've come too far. But it may not look to the outside observer that that's happening. So how much do you have conversations with witnesses to kind of check in with themselves to realize where they're at so that maybe they can call the break rather than waiting for the attorney to?
Yeah, right. And sometimes you're right. Sometimes witnesses have some good insight and they can tell like, oh, if I'm getting agitated, so I'll always say, what is your sign that you're gonna flip your lid? Some of them will say like, oh, I might start like clenching my jaw, or I might start like doing something with my hands, or I might start doing this. Some of them are not aware, and I think that's where getting some mock questions is really helpful, because it kind of um, mimics a little bit of what that pressure is going to feel like. And that those are always great times to say, hold on, I'm noticing right now that you're starting to talk in circles. Is there something that's coming up for you? Is there something about this line of questioning that is particularly bothersome? And kind of helping them to identify that, based on, I've been sitting here with you for an hour or two, and I'm noticing that it seems like when you're getting uncomfortable, this is what you're doing. You start to explain away. You're starting to fight a little bit. What's happening, and helping them to recognize like, oh yeah, I guess I am doing that. And it clues in the attorney that like, okay, this is going to be your fun part.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I always do is I try to create an environment where like I would say, hey, I would console myself more of the hothead type, right? I know I'm gonna maybe get argumentative.
You
Some people get,
don't know.
yeah, yeah, give it time, you'll realize it. But no, I try to be mindful of it too, kind of like what you said, right? But at least to kind of identify that. So you have to get to the point where the witness feels comfortable kind of saying, okay, what type of person am I? And I think it helps the witness, because a lot of times the witness has never really thought about like what type of person am I? What is kind of like my attack points? Do I get flustered? Do I get anxious? Like a lot of times they don't even know. Like when you ask them the question where they fall, you see them kind of think for a minute because it's something that they've never really thought about. But when they dive into it, they realize, okay, what it is. And then it also clues in the attorney as well. What has been your experience as far as doing that? Have people been receptive, and does it make them feel more comfortable to kind of get it out on the table so that you can kind of know what their attack points are? Like I said, I don't like to call them weaknesses because it's a negative connotation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'll steal something from Bill that Bill has said. Everyone has a plan until they're punched in the mouth, right? And people do commit, and most witnesses that we work with, they do want to do well, and some of them do have insight to know what their attack points are. Some of them feel like, no, no, I got this. I totally know what I'm going to do, and I don't lose my cool, and I got this. And my thing is like, look, we all think that, right? And then when we're like, anyone that's had a situation where you're like you've had a disagreement with somebody, and then you're like, you know what, next time that person comes and talks to me, let's say if it's my colleague, me and you, Steve, I'm like, you know what, Steve is so wrong. Next time he comes to talk to me, I'm going to tell him A, B, C, and D, and I've got it lined up in my mind, and I know exactly what I'm going to tell you. And Steve's not going to get under my skin. I got this. And then we get on a call, and it's 10 minutes later, and we're shouting and screaming, and you're like, wait, what? That wasn't part of the plan. Or it's 10 minutes later, and you're crying, and it's like, I'm so sorry, and I didn't have apologizing in my plan. It's because we had a plan, and then it went by the wayside when we got into this, all these other factors have now come into play. Your plan is, unless you've practiced it, unless you've been exposed to this, unless you've been through this, and you're like, okay, I'm now, I see what you're saying. And honestly, most witnesses are really, because they do want to do well and they don't want to mess up. Most of them are quite grateful that we're able to take the time and help tweeze that out with them. And again, we it's not like we spend time with them. By the time I've gotten to do some questions with them, we've spent as significant amount of time with them, and it's not just throwing them into the fire. But by that time, most of them are quite grateful that we've been able to identify those things with them.
Yeah, you bring up a couple of good points that I want to follow up on. First and foremost, when you talk about the person who says, "No, I'm not going to get rattled. You're not going to be able to get under my skin," I almost make it my life's goal to try to get under their skin just to prove a point, right? Because every once in a while, you get the witness who doesn't think that they're going to get flustered. They don't think they're going to get upset. They don't think they're like, "No,
Yeah,
I'm good. I
I don't
got
get
this."
flustered.
Yeah.
That's me.
And
Yeah.
then until you get the mock questions, and then sometimes I'll jump in and just push it. And the reason why I'm doing it is not really necessarily to be a jerk about it, but it's more or less to get that person to say, "Oh, I didn't think I was going to become defensive. I didn't think I was going to become argumentative." But to your point, I had a plan to not do that until I got punched in the mouth, and it's like, "Oh, maybe I will." And a lot of times that then helps to kind of illuminate it for them so that then they become more open. But to your point, most witnesses are pretty open. We don't always necessarily have to do that because a lot of times they'll say, "Hey, this is how I am, this is how I operate," which I think is good because it helps build rapport. And I want you to talk a little bit about that is how often do you find in situations where it's either defensiveness, flustered, anxiety, where you have to just call a timeout on actually anything related to the case and just focus on that.
Yeah. Actually, you bring up a good point, and maybe we can probably reel it back even further than that. It is about establishing rapport, and things do come up because there's litigation specific fears, right? So because they don't know. I've had witnesses that think that they're going to go to jail over these, and I'm like, hold on, no, this is a civil case. You're not going to go to jail, or we need to unpack that, or um, they're frustrated because, well, why hasn't this settled, or they don't know some of the litigation specific stuff, so they've got fears about the litigation process in general, right? Is my work going to find out about this? Am I going to get fired? All these things that are going to come up. But in addition to that, they're not coming in as blank slates, and the only thing that they're worried about is the litigation. As we're going through this, as I'm sure you can attest to with the how often we work with witnesses, is when we're going through these things, yeah, they are stressed out, or they might have some anxieties about some of the litigation stuff. But so many times we'll be doing some questions, or we'll be talking about things, and then I can see that they're getting activated. I'm like, hold on, what's going on? And then you find out, well, I'm going through a divorce, or well, I've actually right now just filed for bankruptcy. Um, my mom had a stroke. I just had a witness that that I worked with that came in, and you would think really just stack of papers ready to roll. We're getting through this. We're doing some of the prep, full breakdown, and had a really difficult time. And in the process, we learned that this person was going through a divorce. His mom did have a stroke. All these things are happening all at once, and now on top of it, we're throwing in the litigation stuff. So it's like, here, juggle all this plus this, and you know nothing about it, and you think you're going to lose your job. And then do great. Go ahead and do great, right? So all of that kind of came up, and what we had to do was kind of break it down. Took a little bit more time to unpack some of the personal stuff, and address those concerns before we can even move forward. You're not going to have someone go in and remember. We spend so much time talking to them about how we want to approach the deposition, how we want to target it. We spend time talking about legal strategies, and we spend time talking about our big some of our big pillars, which is to slow down and to not give these big explanations. But if you've got all these things bubbling up, you're not remembering anything that we've talked about. You're not going to remember to slow down. If you're activated, you're going a million miles an hour. If you're activated, you're chatting away and you're not going to notice it. So until we kind of were able to, at least with this particular witness, bring his nervous system a little, let's bring it down a little bit. Let's talk about some of this stuff, clear up some room, and then everything else that we're talking about can be implemented, and they can be a lot more effective.
Yeah, and what do those conversations look like with attorneys? I mean, we work with some great attorneys that kind of understand the kind of the process, but every once in a while, you might have someone, or at least what kind of conversations do you have with the attorneys as far as kind of letting them know, hey, I know this case is important. We're not going to downplay the importance of the case, but we need to spend some time focusing on other things that may not be related to the case. What does that conversation look like? And when are you having those conversations?
Yeah, again, we're really lucky. Most of the attorneys we work with are really give us room to do all this stuff. But I honestly think they go hand in hand. Me talking to the witness about some of these other things has a direct impact on how well they're going to be deposed. So yeah, we can spend all this time talking about the case facts, but if your witness gets the deposition and just flips his lid or her lid, and that doesn't help you at all. So yeah, we spend a little bit more time up front, but you've now got a more centered witness who is able to absorb the many things that we're trying to tell them. Again, we do this day in and day out, so it doesn't seem like tons, but they're just having to consume so much new information, talk in a way we want them to talk in a way that they don't talk in real life, and to think about things differently. So yeah, I will take a little bit more time to unpack some of these other stressors that are coming up, but in the long run, you're having a more centered witness who's going to remember what we talked about and how to approach this.
Yeah, I think that going back to, building rapport and that when you do that, I don't know about you, but there's been multiple times, right, where we just spend time with witnesses, even sometimes without the attorney, just talking about stuff, and they feel like it's really helped them. And then that point, helping them to alleviate some of that anxiety and stress about the unknowns and kind of peeling back the layers of the onion that are completely unrelated to the actual case facts.
Yeah.
It's like cathartic for them, and they mention how valuable that part is. Not to downplay the legal part, but I think it goes back to your point is you can't get to the legal part if you have the psychology and the anxiety lingering over you. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, and the other thing with it too is that if you have a depo prep where it is highly stressful, where your prep is stressful, and that's kind of the feeling that you leave with as a witness. Like the last time I met and we had to talk about this, I was super stressed out, and it was awful. And then okay, great, we've talked about all this stuff. Go to the deposition. That's not great. So as much as we can, I like to have the experience of the prep be positive, have them leave feeling positive. And when they are thinking back about the last time they met with their attorneys, the last time they talked about this stuff, it wasn't, catastrophic. It wasn't stressful. They left feeling confident. And then you kind of walk into that deposition with a little more pep in your step.
Yeah, and I want to talk another thing too about how a lot of times we end up doing group training kind of for the didactic kind of classroom type stuff where we do it in group settings. But I guess though, what is your thoughts around the fact of how open do you think witnesses are in those situations? Like, is that the time when you're doing a group setting with three, four, five witnesses to start asking all these sensitive questions or asking these witnesses, hey, are you the nervous type? Are you the defensive type? Are you the angry type? I mean,
Yeah.
do you do that in the group setting or how do you approach
Don't
that?
love sharing about your personal stuff in front of many people. You don't
Yeah, it's
love
go figure,
you don't
right?
love admitting how you like to argue in front of other people. No, I think the group sessions are can be really useful for sure if we've got tons that we want to do. Typically, what we'll do is um, do a session with everybody where we're at least giving them the roadmap. We're giving them the dictionaries. We're talking about depositions. This is how we want to approach it. This is why. All of that. As far as the personal stuff, like what do you feel? How is your anxiety going to present? What are bad facts that you're worried about? Are there any, we talk about dirty laundry questions, things like that. We need to know, is there a criminal background? We need to know, is there any family stuff that's going on? Things like that. No, not a great time, obviously. So we'll save that for a one-on-one discussion where we can, you know, tweeze out any of that, any of our bad facts or any of our dirty laundry. And one of the things that come up too that witnesses will share um, in regards to they might get defensive and they don't want to answer questions about their family, and that's one thing. Going back to the litigation specific fears, that they don't know that it's attorneys are allowed to ask about your family. They're allowed to ask about all these things, and a lot of witnesses go, well, what does my wife have to do with this? Why do they need to know where my wife works? And now they're want to fight because why are you talking about my family? I don't want to talk about my family. Helping them to understand, and those are the things that come out when you're having these one-on-one conversations. That yeah, hey, I don't want people to ask me about my kids, and where we have to explain, well, we would do the same thing on the other side, and par for the course for, this is how it goes and all that jazz.
Yeah, I think it goes back to a lot of education, right? I think we take all of this for granted when we're talking about legal topics and stuff, is that you forget how little witnesses actually know about anything. So I think one of the things to help alleviate that anxiety, you had mentioned it before, is educating, but that means almost taking baby steps, going through who's going to be in the room, who's going to be asking you questions, where's the court reporter, where's the videographer, the plaintiff might be there, not that it happens that much, but I mean, I've heard times where the plaintiff is there, and you have to prepare the witness for that because you could imagine the shock of that going into the room and then having to sit there with the plaintiff or a loved one of a deceased and then basically, say that you didn't do anything wrong and have that person sitting right there. I mean, there's all this education. So how do you address that, or what are your thoughts around just kind of the value and importance of educating witnesses on the process, not just the questions themselves?
Yeah, I always spend a good chunk of time right off the bat just talking about the deposition. Yeah, it's about the logistics, who's going to be there, um, talking about objections, obviously, helping them to understand they don't know what the objections are and why those are helpful to them. So a lot of it is about the logistics like that. But also, I spend a lot of time talking to them about um, this is not the point of the deposition is not for you to win this. A lot of people come in and they're like, they want to fight this, they want to defend themselves. And really, it's yes, it's about educating about who's going to be there and the court reporter and making sure you enunciate it or don't say mm-hmm and all that. But it's also about, hey, this is the goal here. Our goal is not for you to win this for us. You're not going to say anything that's going to win this. I spend a good chunk of time on that because I think it's really hard for people to sit there and take questions for many hours that are not framed to make them look good, that are framed to trap them, and they're having to be mentally engaged for 7 hours or however long they're there and not want to fight. So I think a lot of it is understanding also the objectives and the goals of the deposition, and the goal isn't to win anything or to score any points, right? So it's a lot of that as well.
And how shocked have these witnesses been when you say to them, well, what do you think a deposition is? And then they say, it's my chance to tell my side of the story. You're like,
I'm like, no,
not not so
don't tell
much
your
for
story. Yeah, yeah, not so much. But yeah, that's and a lot of attorneys want to make it, the plaintiff side is going to, we're having a conversation. They want to establish rapport too in the deposition. And you got to tell them, hey, I'm sure plaintiff's attorney is lovely and I'm sure they're great and they'd be great to have a beer with. But that isn't what we're trying to do in the deposition. We're not just having a back and forth dialogue. This is the goal. This is the objective. This is what they're trying to accomplish. And this is what we're trying to accomplish, and now helping the witness to square that in their own minds that makes sense to them.
yeah. And I want to talk to you a little bit about one other topic kind of
I don't
before we
drink beer for
circle.
the record. I do wine, but I'm sure they'd be great to have a glass of wine with as
There,
well.
there you
But
go.
yeah, yeah.
I want to ask about too, when we talk about witnesses and kind of throwing them into it and stuff like that, what has been your experience as far as, I think there's a lot of times we talk about kind of the life stressors that people are having, whether they're getting divorced or going through bankruptcy. There's kind of the stressors that are related to not knowing what questions or who's going to be in the room. But I think the other stressors you have is trauma and working with some of these witnesses, as far as we have drivers that have been in fatalities, right? And there's dash cam footage of it. And, you know, the plaintiffs obviously did not downplay the injuries that the plaintiffs have experienced, but I think sometimes what happens is we overlook and underappreciate the trauma that the drivers or somebody who's actually been involved in it too is experiencing. So how do you deal with that, knowing that this person likely is going through it? And as a secondary question to it, what happens when you get the witness who says, no, I'm fine, this hasn't impacted me? What do you do in that situation to find out? Because I think sometimes not all of them are telling the truth.
Mhm. Yeah, and you bring up a great point in that a lot no these no one is having a great time going through these cases, but particularly in a case where there has been a catastrophic outcome, and even if it's not catastrophic, these are people that are involved in, something bad has happened. And I think for us and for attorneys, we see dash cam videos so often and we see pictures so often, and we're quite desensitized almost to seeing some of this stuff. um, And I think it's really important to take a step back and realize that this might be the first time that the witness is seeing something like this at all, ever, that even doesn't involve them. But then further, I mean, sometimes I've had a witness who is a truck driver that we had to show them the video of the dash cam because obviously it's going to be shown at the deposition, and we didn't want that to be the first time that they were exposed to it. And he completely broke down. He looked totally fine, wasn't going to be phased by it, but as soon as we saw it, broke down and started crying, and because the end result was that the person it had passed away. So these are heavy, heavy things that they are having to contend with. So I think in that particular case, obviously we needed to we watched the video slowly, we prepped him like this is what we're going to be seeing, and then we did show him, and then we stopped talking about the case facts. We needed to address that, let him have that time to unpack some of that, talk about his, there's guilt involved. A lot of times people feel guilty. Just because there's litigation doesn't mean that you did something wrong. They'll read the complaints and they're like, oh my gosh, this sounds awful. I did so many things wrong. And you're like, no, 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 that doesn't mean that. That's not necessarily true. So unpacking that guilt for them, helping them to again, it's almost desensitizing them a little bit to what they're seeing so that they aren't having that same reaction in the deposition.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we see sometimes, the mistake is you want to just show the witness the video, right? Because it's going to come up at the deposition. Let's just blast them with the video. Either they haven't seen it
Yeah.
before, they have a memory or recollection of how they think it went, or they've seen it once and they haven't seen it again in a significant amount of time. And I guess, what are your thoughts on just saying, hey, here comes the video, watch it, or does there need to be a build up and a lead up to it to kind of take baby steps?
I take baby steps. I think it's important to sometimes I'll talk to them. What do you remember? We've seen the video. This is what it's going to show on the video, and maybe we talk through it before we jump into the actual video itself. Yeah, I don't love always throwing them into it. Look, some people I'm sure are fine. They want to just throw it at me um, until they've watched it, and then they're not fine. So I certainly spend time, at least for myself, talking about the video, what they're going to see, what they remember before jumping into it.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point too, is you can't always necessarily believe a witness, right? And meaning that it's kind of our job to assess the witnesses and get an understanding. So the witness who says, I'm going to be fine, hopefully you've done some kind of discussion on the front end to know like he or she says they're going to be fine, but I know they're not going to be fine. So I need to, regardless of what they say, I need to kind of use my judgment, professional judgment to kind of set
Yeah.
the stage for it rather than just say, oh, well, you said you're going to be fine. Let's just show it to you.
And no one's going to be mad if you take 10 minutes to just talk about it beforehand. I'm sure you're going to be fine, but I'm just going to, I've watched this for the first time. Let me just kind of, this is what I saw. And like, what do you remember? No one's going to be mad that you took 10 minutes to talk about it, even if they're saying they're fine before you do it. So no harm, no foul, I think, if you do it anyways.
Yeah. And I want to move a little bit to kind of anxiety when you were talking, you mentioned earlier about kind of the signs and symptoms of anxiety and stress. I mean, what are some of the things that you see so that attorneys kind of know, all right, I see my witness starting to do this. These are signs and symptoms now of anxiety, and I need to, if I even see them starting to come, is when I need to call a break.
Mm-hmm. Um, this chat, 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 chat. That's a big one. I'm sure, that is the biggest one. If they start off, we talk about the pace, we talk about explanations. This is how we want to approach these things. We're gonna, take pauses, be intentional with our responses. They start out great, and then it keeps going. Then all of a sudden their pauses are they're answering really quick before attorney has asked a question, or their one sentence response is now turning into two or three. Those are clues to me that that person is they're gonna go into their explain, explain, explain mode. Um, some people get their sass starts to come out a little bit, or they're like, "Well, what would you do in that situation?" I just had someone that did that in a prep session, and they were like, "Oh, I didn't realize that I was going to get snappy like that." So their sass comes out where they start to fight back. If you're asking a question back to plaintiff's attorney, probably a great time to pump the brakes a little bit.
Yeah.
Those are probably the two most that are covert without being overtly, you know, combative. But those are signs to me that okay, you're getting at something is happening. Whether if you're trying to explain something, if you're trying to explain away and you're starting to talk faster, you're becoming activated. The feeling I always tell witnesses, if you start to feel like, when we were in elementary school and we'd have to take those like time tests and they're like, you got 30 seconds to answer these questions. And you're like, oh my gosh, okay, I gotta go, I gotta go. If you're starting to feel that feeling, pump the brakes. Nothing good comes from a timed multiplication test, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think one of the other things I noticed too is the witness starts answering questions that weren't even asked of them, or you're like, wait, time out. What was the question they just asked you? And then the witness will repeat back the question. You're like, that wasn't the question.
No, no,
So you
yeah,
start noticing too that where they're misinterpreting questions or they're overthinking questions, and they're not answering what is even being asked of them. And I think the other one too is we see kind of that the freeze appease type reaction where they're just saying yes, yes, yes to everything. And then you're like,
yeah.
time out. Why did you just say yes to that? And they're like, I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I just was working with a witness that is their default. And a lot of it is cultural. And I can almost this witness and I actually had this conversation because my family is from the Middle East and we're almost I am not like this, but I'm supposed to be. If my culture had it perfect, I would be this very humble, and I am humble, but very docile, kind of like yes, of course. And even if I did something great, it's to downplay it and say yeah, yeah. So part of it is also cultural, that we are taught that it's not good to be succinct. It's not good to be overly confident, and it's great to always be a people pleaser and say yeah, yeah. And this person and I related in that sense. Again, to my mother's chagrin, I am not like that, but it is something that was coming up for him as well, that he feels badly if he isn't kind of giving some of that, yeah, okay, yeah, I agree. And he was just on the yes train, and I was like, hold on, what was the question they just asked? Is that true? And he's like, well, no. And I'm like, well, then why are we saying yes? Right. So part of it is because they've now been activated, and their default is to freeze and to want to just agree to get out of this. But um, there's also the cultural stuff that comes out too in some of these conversations.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's not that you just don't you downplay the cultural aspect, right? Whereas why they're doing certain things is a cultural based thing, and getting them to understand kind of the process of the litigation and the process of a deposition, which is a little bit different, right, than their normal everyday conversations. And I think one of the things I always have with witnesses is they always try to say, "You're trying to change who I am. You're trying to make me someone who I'm not. You're trying to change my personality." Can you speak a
Mhm.
little bit about that, about how we're not really trying to change their personality? What we're trying to do is give them a framework.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I always say these are our goals. This is the I want you to understand the game plan. I want you to understand the approach. Here's how we want to approach it. I want you to get the spirit of that, and you have to incorporate that into how that presents for you. We don't want you to sound like me or Steve or the attorney or whatever. This has to sound like you, but understanding this is the plan, and I'm telling you these are the pillars and how we want to approach this. These are the pillars where you can that you have control, that you can harness that control, and we want you to implement that into whatever sounds like for you. And that's part of the practice when we do get to the mock um, deposition questioning. That's where they get a chance to take everything we've told them in theory and have that and implement that into something that sounds like them. So I certainly don't want them to try to regurgitate anything that we're telling them. But hey, understand this is the plan. This is what the goal is. This is the spirit of it. And then how does that manifest for you? And they really don't know unless you've practiced it, unless you can talk about it all day, but until you feel what it feels like to have those questions come at you, until you're in it, it's kind of hard to know what you're going to do, how that's going to manifest, what you're going to say. So I think, yeah, it's super important that they sound like themselves, with keeping in mind the areas that we want to control.
Yeah, and let's talk about the practice a little bit because I know that there's various ways to look at this. I know some people like, let's ask the witness a question, they give an answer, and then now let's talk about it, right? Question, answer, talk
Mhm.
about it. Question, answer, talk about it. Then there's the let's just do 45 minutes and let you just get asked the questions for 45 minutes and basically spin out of control for 45 minutes and then we'll go back and talk about it. How do
Mhm.
you approach it? I mean, it's probably a little bit more of the middle of the road between those two, right?
Yeah, I think it also depends on the witness. If the witness is super anxious, then I might parse it out a little bit more so that they can kind of get comfortable, and we can interject, and maybe they need more positive reinforcement if they're super anxious. But typically I do like the witness to get a feel for some of that pressure where they might be messing up and maybe they are going down a wrong path, and I want them to feel what that feels like so that we when we do correct it or when we do call it out, then it's like I see how that happened. Yes, I agree to something that wasn't true, and now I got down 15 minutes of questioning. Well, I don't go that far, but maybe
Yeah.
10 minutes of questioning because I either offered up too much information or because I agreed to something. So it really helps to one, frame why we're telling them to do what we're doing. This is what can happen if we are offering too much information. If you're saying yes when you really mean no, or it depends. But also they're feeling that pressure. What do you do when you're under pressure? What comes up? Are you going to start yapping? Are you going to shut down? What's going to happen? So I do want them to have a little bit of what that feels like.
Right.
Unless
Just
of course they're super anxious, then I might go baby steps a little bit more.
yeah, but I guess the crux of it, right, is it shouldn't be question answer, or question answer, let's talk about it. Question answer, let's talk about it. And it shouldn't be 45 minutes. It's kind of use your best judgment to kind of get a feel for where the witness is at. Because I think I want you to talk a little bit about the fact is the cookie cutter approach to witnesses. Not a good idea, right?
Yeah, no, unless you've cloned people and then cloned every, variable around them, then probably not. Not great.
Yeah, so it's taking each one and understanding that somebody might have it take to it a little bit better than someone else, and that person who's taken to it better might not need as much work. But that means though, not saying what works for this person is going to work for that person, because if you start doing it that way, I think you're doing a disservice to the person who really needs the additional work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's everyone's coming in with their own external stressors, their own internal fears, about the litigation or other things. So yeah, there isn't. I've yet to find a cookie cutter path that works for every single person. If you find one, you do
Yeah.
tell me,
Yeah,
but
I'll
I
let
haven't
you
gotten
know
there
if I
yet. Yeah,
ever.
you let me know, but not yet.
Yeah, and in talking about kind of the not having a cookie cutter approach and kind of we're dealing with anxious witnesses, how do you address kind of the normalcy? Because I think one of the things that we find is that a lot of witnesses think, all right, I should be able to get this. I should be able to, I did this training, I started doing the mock questions, I should be able to get it right. And then you get some witnesses who do, and then you have other ones that don't. And then all of a sudden their confidence crashes and burns, and they're like, I'm just not going to be able to do this. I'm not smart enough to do this. I can't handle this. Like, how do
Mhm.
you have a conversation with them, kind of normalizing that what they're feeling and what they're experiencing is basically what we see on a daily basis?
Yeah, and I literally just had that with a witness just yesterday. We're super intelligent. No, nothing. There's no questions about whether he understood the information. He got it down. And when we got to the mock questioning, and he was doing fine, but he was really feeling like I don't get this. And I spent so much time talking about how no one does, because we don't, the way that we're asking you to approach this, especially if you're someone that's like me. I'm a I love to talk to people. In case you can't tell, I love to talk. Don't ever get me and Bill in a room
No, so
together
I was going
because
to say the two
no
of
one
you
will ever
cannot be
shut
on
up.
podcast together. It would
No,
just be
don't.
a seven-parter.
Exactly. So yeah, I love to talk. I love to connect with people. This idea of not giving all this superfluous stuff around an answer. If you ask me a question, especially if it's an open-ended one, and I have to fight everything in me to give you the whole long-winded answer, that's going to be difficult for me. Or again, like I said, it might be a little argumentative and defensive sometimes. So if you're going to come at me with something and I'm telling, and we're telling our witnesses, don't worry about it. Don't fight it. Your legal team's going to fight it later on. That's quite difficult. Or we're asking you to take an intentional pause. We're essentially asking you to do things that we don't do in a normal social settings, that our brains are super efficient at doing, have been trained to do in for the, however long we've been alive. So now I'm telling you, don't do any of that, right? Don't talk quickly, right? We match social paces, we match tempos. Don't do that. Don't worry about matching tempos. Don't worry about connecting with this person. Don't worry about giving all this extra, verbiage. Safety is not your top priority. That's the big one. People are like, wait, what? And then you explain it to them and they understand why that's not a true statement, but we're asking them to think about things in a very different way. So I always say, if you did know how to do this right away, that would potentially be more problematic than you not knowing how to do this. So I want them to fail, so that we can, I think it helps highlight why the prep is important. And I think it helps highlight what the game plan is and how we want to approach it.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, being open and transparent with the witness of saying what you're going through, you are going to fail. And I usually tell them kind of like the three steps, especially of trying to keep your answers short and concise. So someone who likes to talk a lot is I'm going to say you're really going to go through three phases in this. One, I'm going to jump in and tell you that you're talking too much. Stop talking.
Mhm.
Two, you're going to get to a point where you're talking too much, and then you're going to cut yourself off and go, I said too much, didn't I? And then three, you're going to get to a point where you don't make that mistake, right? But understanding that all of it's a progression. And the same thing with speed, right? I'm going to tell you you're going too fast. And then you're going to
Yeah.
realize you went too fast. And then you're going to stop going too fast. So just getting them to a point where the failures are exactly what we expect, and them normalizing it. So they're like, oh, okay, because I think the last thing you want is witnesses to think, I'm too stupid to pull this off. Basically, I'm a train wreck, because then they're kind of catastrophizing how the deposition is going to be
Right.
versus kind of building them up with positive reinforcement and constructive criticism.
Yeah. And this goes back to, I really always like to leave off when they're feeling good, when they're feeling confident. I think that's almost more important than, we can come back at another time if there's some case strategy that we need to unpack or unfold. But if they're doing well in their mock questioning, and we touch base with them, how are you feeling? And they're like, I'm feeling really good. I feel like I'm feeling really confident. I'm like, excellent. Like, we can unpack anything else that's strategy wise or anything like that, at a later time. But this kind of goes back to, I want them to leave the prep feeling positive, because then they're carrying that with them. They're carrying a positive experience around the deposition into the real deposition, versus this, well, I sucked then, I'm going to suck tomorrow. And, that's just the way that it is. And well, now game over.
And I guess too is, what does the conversations look like? I think, a lot of times we set it up in a couple phases, sometimes three, sometimes four. But what has been your experience where four is not enough? Do you just kind of throw your hands up and say, well, we did four, this person's not ready? Or do you have to push to try to get additional time? Or at least, what are the conversations you're having both with the witness and the attorneys, as far as understanding, like, this is an iterative process. It may not work for everyone. We may need more time. Just because you did this and you're not ready, we're not just going to leave you out to dry.
I mean, in a perfect world where all the lines, all the stars align, and we are able to get more time with the witness, certain the witnesses, I have not received pushback from, well, sometimes there are people that are, kind of disinterested, but in general, most witnesses want to do well. And especially if they are getting into questioning and they feel like they're not doing well, no one wants to go into, they have to go to the deposition, right? They're not getting out of it. Nobody wants to go feeling poorly. So most of the time the witnesses are really on board with, like, no, let's do more. Like, come at me harder, throw hard questions at me, I want to get this right. Yeah, I'll carve out more time to do that. So yeah, in a perfect world, if time allows and everything else falls into place and we can, yeah, some witnesses do need more time, and some of them can't do a long stretch of time. So maybe our mock questioning is only 2 hours, or maybe it's an hour and a half, and then we need to come back again to do smaller sections. So if it's a particularly anxious witness, yeah, we do a disservice by trying to do as much questioning as we can in 4 hours, that you're beating a dead horse at that point. You're just going to stress them out further. So again, this goes back to, there's not a cookie cutter approach, but it's really going to be witness specific. But yeah, in a perfect world, we can. tailor to what their needs are.
Yeah, and that entails starting early, right? Making sure because we could do the classroom stuff 30 days out, 45 days out from the deposition and do the other stuff soon or closer to the deposition. But I don't think you necessarily, if you know you have a witness who's going to be deposed, let's say at the end of June, that doesn't mean you necessarily need to wait until the middle of June to start everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The earlier, the better. And look, sometimes you might not necessarily know that the witness is anxious. So sometimes attorneys will be like, no, I think the witness is fine. And then we meet with them and I'm like, well, but they're not, right?
Yeah.
So and then all this stuff starts coming out, and then the attorney's like, oh gosh, I didn't know any of that. And so yeah, again, in a perfect world, start early. If there are things that are problematic, then we have some time where we can say, hey, we might need to space out sessions a little bit more. We might need to do, in addition to the educational part, maybe we need to do a couple mock question sessions. And then maybe we need to do a little touch up right before. Maybe the touch up right before is just a conversation and not even questioning. So yeah, and again, as much as we can, earlier the better, so that we can tailor things for these very non cookie cutter situations.
Yeah. And I think that really kind of sums up what we've been talking about, right? Is knowing witnesses have anxiety. They have anxiety as it relates to the litigation process, but
Mhm.
they have other sort of life stressors, other sort of things that they're dealing with that may not manifest themselves right off the bat. So what you think was a good witness is all of a sudden not going to be a good witness. So giving yourself enough time and putting the structure in place to identify that, right? Because a lot of times the questions aren't being asked the same way that we're asking the questions. So what you think is a good witness because you haven't asked kind of the deeper dive questions doesn't allow
Mhm.
you the time to realize what the real anxiety is.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
So I encourage everybody that the Law 360 paper is out. I think both of you and I posted on LinkedIn. If anybody wants it, they can feel free to reach out to me at swood at Courtroom Sciences. Linda, what is your email if someone wants to reach out to you either for the paper or just to talk to you about anything else?
Yeah, it's L, and then my last name is Khzam, which is spelled a little wonky, Khzam at Courtroom Sciences. L Khzam at Courtroom Sciences.
Well, I appreciate the time, Linda. I know, like I said, you and I have a few more podcasts lined up that you and I are going to come back and talk about especially some traumatic brain injury stuff. So appreciate you coming on here. You haven't been kicked off the podcast yet. We'll have
Oh
you.
well, there's still time.
I know. Well, we'll see. Like I'm going to keep, as I said, I'm going to keep you and Bill away from each other for
Okay,
everyone's sake. So you and I will have these conversations. Uh,
awesome.
yeah, and I
Uh,
appreciate everybody tuning in. Either you're watching on YouTube, listening on any of your podcast platforms. Go to YouTube, like, subscribe the webpage, leave us feedback, let us know what you like, what you don't like. We appreciate all of that stuff. And we will see you on another edition of Litigation Psychology Podcast brought to you by Courtroom Sciences.